Hello everyone, Books with Banks back again with my first book review and first video to drop in the new year. Happy 2024 everyone, yay. Today I'll be talking about Iron Flame, but if you haven't already, it would mean a lot if you could please like and subscribe and all that fun stuff. Thanks. So here we go. Iron Flame was written by Rebecca Yarros. This is her second book in the larger Empyrean series. The sequel was published in November 2023, only a short 7 months after the first book in the series, Fourth Wing. Both books, but in particular the first one, Fourth Wing, received a lot of praise and hype in certain fan communities. Places like Book Talk really helped raise the hype level for the series. That said, the conversation in my particular corner of BookTube seemed, if these books were mentioned at all, it was a little bit dismissive, but really not much was being said about them. Anyway, my fiance recommended I read at least Fourth Wing, the first one, and she's getting more and more into fantasy kind of through that side door of romantasy, the subgenre, and I really love the idea of getting into a new series with her, with new books coming out. So I read Fourth Wing first. Had mixed but overall pretty positive feelings about that book, and then I read this one. Now, it's not horrible by any means. I've actually heard like crazy theories out there that it was either written by AI or maybe written by some committee in a room all trying to make a soulless, easily marketable product instead of art, instead of a story, and trying to pass it off as art. And all of this kind of also goes into how it was published so quickly, why maybe there were so many printing errors, etc. It was all done by machines, all just such a big corporate product. This kind of idea, honestly, I think those critiques take things a little bit too far. I'd say there's plenty of evidence throughout this novel, regardless of anyone's feelings about it. There's plenty of evidence that a single creative mind and voice shaped this narrative and told this story, and that this was actually a story that Rebecca Yarros really did want to tell, and that she continues to feel passionate about telling. I think all of that's true. I just don't feel that she does a particularly good job telling this portion of the story. But before getting into some of my issues with the book, let's talk about what it's about. And I should say here, I'll remain relatively spoiler free, only kind of alluding to a few things here or there. And then near the end, I'll signal when I get into heavier spoilers, when I kind of want to really zero in on some of my heavier criticisms. But what's this book about? For those of you unfamiliar, the whole series is basically about a war college where young late teens, early 20-somethings, they're trained in one of 4 quadrants. Our main cast is primarily from the Riders Quadrant, wherein those who survive the rigorous testing and violent coursework will eventually be able to bond with a dragon, and they'll be able to ride dragons into battle, fight for the Empire, that sort of stuff. So, without spoiling too much of the first book, without spoiling Fourth Wing, basically that book ends with a few big reveals at the end of the student's first year, and there's this really big turning point. I won't say too much more there. All of this sets up our main character, Violet, for her second, much more dangerous, intense second year in the Writers' Quadrant at Basgiath War College. Again, for spoilery reasons that I won't get into, Violet's forced to spend a decent amount of time now away from a main romantic interest of hers, and she's also forced to deceive those she once thought of as her close friends. All the while, she's under far more scrutiny from old and new faculty and political figures alike. Again, it can be very difficult to go into more detail without spoiling things. But basically, despite all these difficulties, Violet is able to focus on a few goals, kind of set some tasks for herself, like researching the history of the wards, these magical barriers for the kingdom. She's researching this mystery from a couple different kind of angles. One, she's coming to learn more and more about just how the magic in this world works in general. And then two, she's trying to untangle centuries of misinformation, propaganda, and censored history. And all of that I do think is pretty fascinating stuff. Anyway, a few more things here. Just kind of trying to give this general overview. As Violet learns more about the world, so do we. As she and her classmates are put through more and more rigorous tests, we start questioning which friends deserve the truth about the world, and which of her friends maybe should be left in the dark. So all in all, that is roughly what you'll find in the first half or so of Iron Flame. We get another turning point of sorts partway through, and the world and magic, all I'll say is things really just kind of open up from there, and I do think the book improves at that point. Yeah, there's just more characters added to the cast, and there's kind of more firm lines drawn in the sand between who to trust and who not to trust. And then the book kind of just races towards a decently epic conclusion, with, of course, a few good teases and cliffhangers to keep fans excited for book 3. So there you have it. That's basically the overview. Again, not spoiling anything with this book, trying not to spoil anything from the first one either. And here are some other kind of spoiler-free positives, things that I actually really enjoyed and that I thought Yarros did very well, very successfully. This is definitely a book that focuses on both the psychological and political ramifications and consequences of the last one, and I always like when sequels do acknowledge those sorts of things. This book also showcases more cultures and locations from around the world, whereas the first book was really super focused on the setting of that war college, with only a couple brief kind of excursions elsewhere. This one, you get to spend a little bit more time in different locations, learn more about the world. Yarros also toys around with a bit of a redemption arc for one character, and I was really worried she was going to try to do this for this character, and I was worried she wasn't going to handle it well. But at least on this point, I think I should have trusted her more, because even though as rare and kind of inconsequential as the scenes relevant to that side character's redemption, as rare as those moments are, they are some of my favorite scenes. I think, yeah, my favorite scenes in the back half of the book, definitely. And I think they feel particularly powerful, and they stick out because in these scenes we have two characters demonstrating a level of emotional maturity that I think was more present in the first book than anywhere else in this second one. Yeah, I also Yarros manages to effectively tug on some heartstrings with, some close calls late in the book, some decently tragic moments. Again, I won't go into too much there with the spoiler-free section. Yeah. And there is one twist that I think was adequately signaled that something would happen there, sort of to build our anticipation, but Yarros had enough care and control of her story to still keep it a bit mysterious, still kind of keep shuffling the cups around. So, even though it was one thing I was predicting might happen, it was never, the one thing I knew would happen. I was never 100% confident in that prediction of all the kind of things I felt, oh, this could happen, that could happen. This one was on the table, but it was never obvious or super obvious. And so when it happened, I found it pretty enjoyable. Yeah. Also, if you're into love scenes, there's one or two here that are probably a little bit more interesting, or at least more unique than anything you get in Fourth Wing. There's more than 2 love scenes in this book. A lot of them, I just it didn't really do much. Now, for some spoiler-free, more negative critical responses, I'll set this down. This book is rife with problems. The first big problem that springs to mind, and that appears early on, has to do with the fact that it's a sequel, and it's this sort of limits that Yarros puts on herself, giving her far less time to explore the character dynamics she had been building us up to for most of the first book. In essence, a lot of book one is building up to this one particular trial or test of sorts, after which our main character, Violet, then has kind of two other characters to bounce ideas off of, and the conversation between this trio, including the main character, their whole conversation dynamic, and just their different personality types. They really complement each other. They really work well together and help to show multiple perspectives on the world. I think just helps to strengthen our main character's critical thinking, and just gives multiple viewpoints on the world and the magic. This book, Iron Flame, one of that group of three, is set aside for more than half of the story. And while a magical reason is given for why that character isn't around, I struggle to understand, I struggle to understand why Yarros had to make that magical reason like a rule of her magic. Like, it's not like that had to be, she didn't have to do that. She's designing the magic system, right? Or how magic works in this world. So she didn't have to put a rule in place that cuts off one of the first book's more interesting characters from being around for really any of the first half of this one at all. And narratively, I don't understand why it had to happen. There's no real big payoff for that character being away and then coming back. It was just very odd, and it felt like Yarros was limiting her ability to use that trio to explore really interesting ideas, and to really put some more fun conversations in the first part of the book. In a similar vein, the first book builds up this kind of romantic kind of plot line. Then, for admittedly a more understandable and logical reason, this couple, they don't get to spend a lot of the early parts of the sequel together. And so again, it's the same sort of thing where Yarros is she's cutting off the main character from some really interesting side characters. Maybe it's to isolate Violet, to show her succeed without those characters. But I'm not really sure that that's ever argued or explained, or it doesn't really seem like that's what's going on. So I just don't know why she's getting rid of these people for Violet to talk things through with. Anyway, this criticism goes hand in hand with one of my major issues with the book, the regressed and inconsistent characters. I would think prevailing wisdom is that when we're fans of a series, we want to see our favorite characters grow and learn from their mistakes. And if they're having difficulty growing, or maybe if they're making or maybe if they're even taking like several steps back, there should be some kind of compelling narrative reason for this. But no, I feel like in this book, a lot of the interpersonal dramatic situations are the result of characters being just simply less thoughtful, less careful, less self-aware than they were in the first book. For a quick, not really spoilery example, our main couple in this book, their conversations are almost entirely about trusting each other. And things like the full disclosure of all their secrets, the need to ask each other questions and actually sit down and talk through their issues. So much time in this book is spent with our main character agonizing over these ideas, coupled with how she now has to withhold information from and maybe even lie to her friends. Violet of this book, of the sequel, is obsessed with A, is she a good person if she lies to her friends? And B, why won't he, the boy, tell me all of the secrets he's keeping for other people? Now, I can understand these things being on her mind somewhat, but unless I misread her, the Violet from the first book, from Fourth Wing, she would maybe briefly consider things like this, things like trust, self-identity, moralizing kind of issues, but then she would quickly move on to spending most of her time strategizing and thinking about the new kind of life-threatening challenges that the faculty and that the war college is throwing towards her and her friends. She seemed like a much more practical logic. I don't know, just driven kind of more towards that kind of mindset in the first book than this one. Where, yeah, book one, Violet, I don't see being as easily distracted by these things. Anyway, the perilous scenarios in the second entry are only more intense than those of the first. So when the students are being threatened with, say, a sort of educational torture class, it's just really jarring to then turn the page and see Violet worrying for pages and pages about how someone won't tell her all his secrets. When book one, Violet would be immediately trying to figure out how to navigate these new perils and how to kind of find a clever way around them. That's what made her so interesting in the first book. Also, the villains of this book, they are much more obvious and kind of like mustache twirly, kind of they're stupid in how poorly they hide how cruel they're being to the students. Like the threat of the politically and physically powerful faculty was actually a pretty cool, fun, mysterious element of the first book. You never knew which of the teachers the students could trust, which of the teachers actually had the students' best interests in mind, and which teachers didn't care about the writers dying or not. But in this one, it's kind of pretty clear which teachers you could trust and which you can't. It's like they all get a lot worse at hiding their secrets and their hidden agendas. Also, even within this book itself, kind of still on this point of characters and characters behaving inconsistently, there's a relatively new character. Won't say who it is. It's a bit of a spoiler. This character comes in at the beginning of the book. We get a lot about their philosophy and why they're part of a certain group. All pretty gripping early on stuff. Early on, a lot to do with sympathy for the weak and those that have been cut off from help. But then his stone cold refusal to help innocents in peril later near the end of the book, all because of a personal conflict with one like politically involved family member that would also benefit from him helping those innocents. It's just very weird that that's such a hang up for this character. Very disorienting. Then a lot of the page count later in the book is in dealing with a scorned former lover who has to work with the new romantic partner. And Yarros follows this romance genre tradition beat by beat, not really doing anything unusual or surprising with it. Not yet, at least. So there you have it. Those are kind of a lot of my rambly, spoiler-free thoughts on this spoiler-free section of the review. But now I'm going to dive into more specifics with spoilers to try to better explain what really didn't work for me about this novel. So if you're leaving the video now, thanks for watching. But if you've read the book or don't care about spoilers, here we go. Violet and Xaden, our main couple, they are extremely frustrating. I haven't read that much romance, but of what I have read, this is probably the pair of characters I get the least sense of chemistry from. There's a lot of description about physical attraction, sexual desire, and a lot of talking about how obsessed they are with each other. I just don't really know why. I feel that outside of the physical attraction part of it, Yarros has not done an adequate enough job of explaining what these two really like about each other. They make vague comments every now and then about, oh, how strong you are, or how smart they are, or how powerful the other one is. But it's all this kind of very superficial, nice, complimentary language. But really, it just seems like a beginning of a relationship with a lot of passion around that physical intimacy part, but not really that much else. So, I don't know. They could stay together, they could break up. It wouldn't really change the story that much. I really wouldn't care at all. Actually, if they broke up, it might be better for their character arcs. And on that point, forgive me for maybe using possibly dated terms that I'm about to use. But given what we know about these two from the first book, I never expected Violet to be boy crazy or Xaden to be girl crazy enough where it actually makes them worse at the things we know they're good at. It is so frustrating to see Violet less successful in school because she can't stop thinking about the trust issues she and Xaden have. And it's equally frustrating to see Xaden willing to really slow down and hinder the revolution's progress, all because he just doesn't want one person, a relatively new romantic person in his life. He doesn't want her to ever be in danger. And on that note, he kind of regresses to a level of overprotectiveness reminiscent of Dane's overprotective nature that we all hated so much in the first book. And it's just, I just don't understand. Like, I get traumatic things and battles and very serious things happen at the end of the first book. So if we focused on those as more of the reasons, the motives for these two acting differently, that would be one thing. But no, most of the focus of this book is they're acting so strange because they don't know if they can trust each other, they don't know how to communicate, and just going over that over and over again, how bad they are at communication, and then thinking about it over and over again. It's just, it's very frustrating. Also, on these two, end of book 1, Xaden needs to know if Violet still loves him and if she'll help the revolution. Violet says yes, but she only loves him if she can have full disclosure and absolutely no secrets on anything whatsoever. Now, Xaden did mess this part up when he agreed to this kind of extreme, weird ultimatum, but he's then quick to walk that back at the beginning of this book, saying he'll tell her anything she wants to know about himself personally, but that A, she has to ask the right questions, and B, he won't be able to tell her certain secrets that aren't really his to share, and other secrets that could jeopardize the mission of the revolutionaries. Honestly, Clause B makes perfect sense to me. Clause A kind of does, but it's weird that Xaden is kind of like, oh, I'll tell you everything you want to know about me, but you have to ask the right magic word, or you have to ask the right specific question. Like, it's sort of like he's posing riddles or something. And I don't know why he thinks this is how secret sharing or this is how trust works. So that's frustrating. And I can agree with Violet's frustration with him on that point. But then I also find her pretty hypocritical when she's criticizing Xaden for keeping other people's secrets from her. She herself keeps things hidden from Xaden, including things that could really politically shake up the conflict for have really large, wide-scale ramifications. Like when she and her family fly to a diplomatic meeting without telling Xaden because he's being too overprotective. It just seems poorly thought out. And again, a little hypocritical. And what's really frustrating from a reading standpoint is that early on, Violet's new friend Imogen points out some of this hypocrisy in Violet's complaints about Xaden. And then later on, Violet herself acknowledges that she's being hypocritical. So Yarros must be fully aware of how frustrating she's making it for us to spend time inside Violet's mind, but Yarros doesn't really give Violet much room or time to move on from that kind of mindset. And Violet was nowhere near this frustrating in the first book, so I just don't get why we're moving backwards. Speaking of which, moving on from the romantic side of things, I actually really was enjoying Violet's main quest or mission early on in the book, where she knows they need to strengthen the wards and she needs to research about how the first 6 used the ward stones and made the wards and how this whole part of the world's magic works. I thought this was pretty compelling, and I was happy to see this really play a major role in the last 100 pages or so. What's frustrating, however, is the underwhelming representation of good research. Now, I get it, most of their archives have been heavily censored, and so this is going to make things all the more difficult, but I was kind of excited to see how she would go about finding older books. I didn't expect her to be reading, or I didn't expect to read a whole section about Violet hunting for answers through indexes and glossaries, reference books, and some kind of magical microfilm. I didn't expect that. Sure, that would have probably made an unreasonable and boring book. But basically, the research boils down to how they need to get their hands on these 2 journals from 2 different members of that first famous group of 6 who first raised the wards. So they get these books and they set to work translating and trying to interpret and puzzle out what these passages mean. And Violet pretty quickly identifies one passage that she's sure is important because it says something about the 6 most powerful, and a word she thinks is blood. So she's then so confident that she and a few other riders, all they have to do, obviously, is cut their hands and hold their bloody hands to the wardstone. All the while, the specific passage she picked out, she's not sure if she's translated every word right. Also, there's portions of the passage that seemingly she and everyone else are just happy to ignore. Like they think this prophecy or instructional phrase had filler words, or that it wasn't well thought out. I don't know. I don't know why they're not paying attention to those other parts of this kind of instructional sentence. Why isn't anyone trying to figure out what why isn't anyone trying to figure out what like the one combined part of it means until later, when that's kind of used as like a twist? It's just weird. It just doesn't make sense. It's horrible research. So they should all know that they have some gaps in their translation and in their understanding of this passage. But yeah, I guess it makes sense to, even with those gaps, it makes sense to, try a few things along the way, some hypotheses. But then for them all to be so devastated when these attempts don't work, it's like, yeah, of course those didn't work, because even later, as we find out, Violet hasn't even read the whole book that they're like using to do this, nor is she the best with these languages. So just like stuff like that, I feel like the Violet of the first book would be much better at puzzling these things out, pay much more attention to the whole book or the book in its entirety, run straight, no matter what personal conflicts or differences, run straight to the person that is the best with these languages. She would have just done a much better job at a task like this in the first book. One more thing I need to talk about is the mom. So Violet's mom, the big bad General Sorrengail, she reveals to Violet that she made a deal with Violet's boyfriend before he was her boyfriend, back before the first book started, to keep Violet safe at school and make sure she succeeded. I cannot understand why this is in the book, other than to give Violet and Xaden something to fight about. And I really don't understand. It takes away from the first book so much, I think, and lessens so many of Violet's achievements in that book. That story was all about her using cleverness to overcome outrageous obstacles. And this is just like, oh, well, no matter how clever she was, she had this safety net of Xaden and Mom protecting her, kind of making us doubt, did she actually accomplish those things that it seemed like she did in the first one, or would she have died more often than not? Was she actually as clever as we thought she was? And it's just, I cannot think why Yarros did this. It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense, because here we were thinking Violet is this extremely scrappy, social, and altogether skilled at navigating the dangers of the Rider's Quadrant, despite her physical weaknesses. But no, Mom and eventual boyfriend were secretly helping her the whole time. It wasn't like a satisfying twist. It just felt really disappointing. And then at the end, when the mom sacrifices herself, that's fine. But that's kind of, honestly, the second time I read a book in 2023 where the parent of our protagonist makes some heroic sacrifice to prove that they're really there for their kids and protecting them, when it just doesn't do much for me, because we don't know that the person making the sacrifice, like the character might. Violet knows her mom, but we don't really know or care about her. I just don't understand it. We have little to no emotional investment in Mom's relationship with anyone other than a pretty antagonistic relationship with her children. So I just don't know why Yarros used the mom like she did in this book. Anyway, a few more notes on the ending. Pretty cool dragon wyvern battle. Pretty cool twist with Jack Barlow being Venin. And I like Xaden reaching to the earth for power and himself also turning Venin, or at least starting that process. A nice touch that has me intrigued for the next book. I also have questions for fans of this book and or others who've read it. One, am I correct in interpreting that final chapter from Xaden's point of view, with him suspended and the venom in front of him? Is that like the scene that Violet has been dreaming about the whole book? But then we find out in that chapter, oh wow, that was actually Xaden the whole time. She was worried it was her, but she was actually dreaming something kind of through his eyes. That's how I read it. I don't know if that was an accurate interpretation or not, but I would really like that if it were. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, and I think it poses interesting questions for how their psychic link works. But also, speaking of magical powers, question 2, why were we introduced to Xaden's second signet in this book? It was a bit exciting, kind of guessing at what it might be for a few pages, and then kind of the shock of how scary and intense it turns out to be. But I don't remember that second power having too much of like an impact on the rest of the book or how things went down. So I kind of wonder why this reveal wasn't maybe saved for a book where such a big secret like this would matter more to whatever specific conflicts arise later. I don't know, maybe will this power help Xaden avoid the worst of the venom stuff? Will it maybe help him find a cure or recover from it in some way? Not sure, but if anyone remembers any scenes that kind of help to justify why this second signet reveal had to be in this book, I'd love to hear it. But I think I've talked enough about Iron Flame for now. Hopefully book 3 brings our characters back to their more enjoyable selves from Fourth Wing. But I guess we'll see. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.